I think I said it's a great job for people who haven't had a nervous breakdown but would like to see what it feels like. I had known of this magician before. I'd never seen him, but he was kind of famous on the university campus for emceeing things and being very witty and sometimes startlingly dirty. So part of the fun was quoting things that he allegedly had said, which sometimes weren't true. I checked with him later. But yeah, it's a very common name, Carson. Quite a few of them in Omaha, and he was one of the ones in Omaha. And he came over from Omaha to Lincoln to do a church basement show, and 3 friends of mine and I went to it. And we sort of surprised him backstage before the show. And magicians hate that because they're setting their stuff. And he gave us this filthy look, but I pushed ahead and told him we were magicians. And then he welcomed us and showed us some great card manipulations and fans. He was a great card man, Carson. This is Johnny Carson, for the dummies watching who don't know which Carson I mean. Or maybe I wasn't clear. But it was thrilling for us, because here was a TV star. He was a TV star in Omaha. Had a 15-minute show with his name on it. And he introduced us from the audience, and we felt like we were at Ed Sullivan. Right in the middle of his act, he finished something. He said, 3 young magicians of your own are here tonight. Right there, and he knew our names. That was astonishing. And we watched him go off into the dark in his probably second-hand Chevrolet. And it seemed nobody watching Rita Hayworth get into a limousine could have been as thrilled as we were watching Carson get into his clunking car. It looked glamorous enough to us. I reminded him of that years later, and he said, "Was that you?" Yeah, it was a strange thing. If we had gotten together and talked, and one of us had said, "What do you want to do for a living? What do you want to be doing 10, 20 years from now?" I wonder if either of us would have said a talk show. But he got there first. There's no way. You can't take a great artist, as Jack was, or if you don't call that art, comparable to art, and give any idea, whether you could tell somebody what Brando was, or Chagall, or Van Gogh, or whoever. He had the most electric kind of personality. There's nothing like it anywhere else in television before or since. A combination of neuroses and wit and curiosity and orneriness, if not meanness. And the great critic Kenneth Tynan said the thing about him you realize when you're watching is when there are 2 people on camera, Jack and the guest, even if it's Cary Grant, you're watching Jack all the time. And you don't want to look away for fear you might miss a live nervous breakdown on your home screen. Jack was able to, danger is the key word in a lot of great performing, and Olivier's acting, and a sense of something's going to happen. And that was always there with Jack. And he let it happen. He would cry, or he would get enraged. He's just in a category by himself. He's not somebody's Jack Paar or the Jack Paar. Nobody else is the Jack Paar of something. There's Jack and there's everybody else. He hated the fact that he quit the show, I'm convinced. He had long periods of not wanting to be there. There were days when the producer, who was a man with his nerves just shot, working for Jack, would say, Jack's having a rather bad day today, we hear. So he just came in, and everybody be, you know. I said in a book once, the book was Cavett, that it's kind of like having an alcoholic parent. The suspense each day, what's he like today, or she? Is this a bad one? Do we have to hang on? All of which went into making Jack the most interesting personality the screen has ever seen. The TV screen. He'd done movies years earlier. It didn't count for anything, and it's lucky that he didn't stay out there doing B parts and B pictures. You won't always see the thing I'm talking about if you look at some of his favorite things that he liked to show on television. I mean, those specials always have this Kennedys and Judy Garland, wonderful with, and Nixon. But those were later Jack, when he was in prime time. And he did the show differently, and there wasn't the night-to-night continuity of neurosis and sensitivity and exuberance and overpraising and underpraising, and just anything you wanted you'd get from him sooner or later. I knew a girl like that once. Well, with Jack, you wrote monologue, but you also wrote, this is a secret that has not always been let out, often the host will give the writers the guest notes that have been made by the guest bookers, and in that they will see that he's going to talk about visiting the Edison house in New Jersey or something, and you give Jack an ad lib about that, or about a light bulb or something. So often some of the best ad libs were written by me and others. I remember one in particular which had to do with why I got hired. It's that old story that people must have heard somewhere, or one like it, where on impulse, to bare bones of it is, I was working at Time magazine as a copy boy, $60 a week, I think. And I saw that Jack Paar hated his monologue more than anything else, according to a columnist, a woman columnist, who said he worries more about it than anything. It almost ruins his day. If I just had the show to do, it would be easy, but that, and so on. So I went home and wrote a monologue for Jack Paar, not even sure what I was going to do with it. Took it to him against all odds, met him in the corridor right at the moment I came around the corner. I gave it to him, and several steps in the story later, I was hired. I went out and sat in the audience, so full of myself that I had given Jack material. And he came out at the beginning, and he reached into his pocket, and he took out folded white typing-sized paper. And I knew what he was going to say. I just, this kid came up to me in the hall. I don't know who he is. And he, I don't know if he's any good or not, but anyway, here's some of his jokes. I thought I'd give him a thrill. But no, it was not to be. It was a written piece of material about something else, how to know if you're from Texas or something. And then I shrank and shrunk down in the seat. And then my lines started to come out in ad lib. There was a mutinous sort of event on one of the high seas at that time, and the headlines were, "The pirate ship now has been sighted." They'd taken it over, this cruise ship. And pirates seen in such and such and so on. So Jack said, what I had given him, everything was working for me that night. A person in the audience happened to ask, "What do you think about that pirate ship?" as Jack was taking the mic around. And he said, "I can imagine the passengers hearing that voice coming over the loudspeaker. 'Attention, please, this is your pirate speaking.'" Well, this got a roar and applause as an ad lib, because as an ad lib you get more credit for it. And a couple more of those, and he was too smart to, I say modestly, to turn down the source of these for that soon anyway. So I got a job writing for him. How you do it is, if you're really qualified for it, you have to be able to hear the comic in your head. I had watched Jack in Nebraska and at Yale, and I knew how he would word anything he said. I could do the same thing with the familiar sound of Groucho Marx, or Burl, or Benny, or Burns, or others, that most of whom I got to write for in the period between Johnny and Paar, or Paar and Johnny, months, which it's been said were either because Johnny was, of course, smart enough not to take over the show on Monday that Jack had left on Friday, and also that he wasn't available from a game show contract, which either one, he certainly would have been smart enough to let some time pass and let some other people do it badly. You know. And some of them certainly did. They've fulfilled all expectations.
Well,
one was so bad when we hated him so much that after the second day of his blowing all our jokes and then complaining they weren't funny, I went downstairs and bought a Bennett Cerf joke book, and we copied jokes out and handed them to him. Two drunks walked into a cathedral, and he didn't seem to know the difference. I'll tell you who it was later. I felt sorry for Johnny in that he was so socially uncomfortable. I've hardly ever met anybody who had as hard a time as he did. And I don't know what it came from, but I would rescue him if, in leaving the studio, going back to his dressing room, 3 tourists or somebody had stopped to talk to him for a moment, and you could see him being affable, but straining. He just was so uncomfortable that way. I'm the opposite. I'm not saying which of us is right. I tend to talk with them too long, and they have to pull me away. Neither one is ideal, but you wouldn't think it, because though he was awkward on the show in the first couple of weeks and didn't get very good reviews, it's hard to believe now, as he has been sanctified since, and rightly so. But his first couple of weeks were rough, and I remember comics sitting backstage and saying, "This guy isn't making it." It's almost impossible to believe that now. And they said, but this guy who started his daytime show on the same network on the very same day, Merv Griffin, now there is a guy who knows how to do a talk show. This is, in fact, findable and provable by a tiny bit of Googling and research. And Merv was good, of course, but it was so hard on Johnny. And he had personal problems, and as a friend said, a wife on the ledge at one point, and drinking more than he needed to. And he doesn't deny any of this, and he's even talked about it. But I really liked him, and he liked me so much I find it almost hard to believe. I mean, he just, I wish it existed, but there was one night I went on the show as a guest, the Tonight Show from California, and I was watching the monitor, and I could see him talking, but I couldn't quite hear what he was saying. And then he looked sort of moved and tearish almost. And I knew that in him because I had seen it the day Stan Laurel died, and I brought him the news. And when I saw the show back, I saw my introduction. And he had said, among other things, we have a kind of fatherly feeling toward Dick here. And it moved him a bit when he said it, and it moved me when I watched it. Because people would say, "Johnny, come on, sentiment, emotion, guy with a ramrod up his spine." It's funny, I realize now why I just said that. I was on a roast of Johnny once on one of those craft roasts, and I had a line that began, "People say Johnny has a ramrod in his back," and he does, and now I can't remember what the punchline was that made it hilariously funny. But he really liked me, and people would say, "You know, he's a different man when you're on the show." And the staff would say, "I wish you were here more often because he just looks forward to you all day." And this might sound strange for two people who were supposedly in competition with each other. I can honestly put my hand on the polygraph device and convince it that I never once thought of myself in competition with Johnny Carson. We were opposite each other. I had a much less prestigious network, shall we say, and what they call a short station lineup. And I never, ever, for a second, expected to stay on more than 3 weeks in any job I did, and in some cases I was right. This one went on, but I called him once when Robert Kennedy was shot and said, how are you supposed to go out and do the show? And he gave me some fatherly advice. I think he enjoyed being called by me because he liked me. And I had dinner at his house. That will put me in a category of very few souls in the world. People of his staff that I had worked with when I was on staff would say, you had dinner last night with Johnny and Joanne or whoever. Took me to the Magic Castle a couple times. And always I thought of him as with seeing him in that church basement way back, as a grown-up to me. He was in the World War II generation. I was 10 years younger. And one time we met in a restaurant in California, a dark restaurant, sat in a booth, and exchanged stories about inept juvenile sexual attempts, experiences, and experiments, the way any two guys would do. If somebody is sitting in the next booth hearing all this, they're getting a great amount. He had just done his Nebraska special, Johnny Goes Back, which was very touching for him. Convinced a lot of people that he had emotions. And in telling me about it, because he had just finished it, I was still editing, and he said, I always can't help sort of throwing my voice up into where his nasality is. Richard, one day they had me come into the schoolhouse, and they had all my old teachers lined up. I opened the door, and they all were lined up, and it was very moving. He did that, and I just thought, I wish people could see this. They just won't believe it. Not that everybody wanted Johnny to come out and cry. A very a good old perceptive friend of mine once said when Johnny was about to come to the Tonight Show, he said, people who love Jack Paar, which my friend did not, emphatically, will say, but Johnny will never cry once if he's on the show for 50 years. To which my friend said, for which I will be profoundly grateful to him. So that was the Paar, pro Carson, or pro Car, pro Parson, if you're talking about an automobile prize at a religious fair. Get me out of this, please. Oh, yeah, how do you know all the bad stuff? Yeah, that was terrible. It's unnatural. It's against nature to write comedy 5 days a week for anybody, anywhere, under any circumstances. It does things to your brain and so on. And I think I came to one of what must be a sort of inevitable built-in stoppage. I had just done too much quite well for a long time, and suddenly just thought, I can't keep it up at this level. And that thought makes it possible that you don't keep it up that well at that level. And I tediously filled 2 pages. That'd be about 4 jokes per page, which was the absolute minimum of monologue, and handed it in, and thought, oh, maybe by tomorrow I'll brighten it up. Bing, the phone rings. Richard, I think you're capable of a little better monologue than this. Oh, God, it hurts me now when I say it. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. It surprised me because I didn't think he'd do that. It impressed me as time went by that he did. And he wasn't nasty about it. And he made it feel like you'd let down one of your parents if you happen to like one of your parents, and then you let that one down. Or a favorite teacher who would say, I really expected more from you on this, you know. That deadly way of doing it. It'd be so much better if they'd say, this is crap, you know, and you want to stay in this class or go out of here on your head. I worked on the next day's monologue that night, which I had never done before. I was fast as they go. It caused some resentment on the part of some older writers because the minute I heard the premise, Chinese New Year, let's say, Jack would often send up a premise. Or if he didn't, then you were going through papers and trying to find a cat caught in a chimney that you could say something funny about. And one day, I just happened to remember it's Chinese New Year. I just went to the typewriter and I couldn't type, though I'm a very fast typist, I almost couldn't type fast enough to not forget the Chinese New Year jokes as they occurred to me in the voice of Jack Paar. This will sound like nothing, but one of them was Mao Zedong celebrated by putting on a paper hat and shelling Formosa. Well, you need at least 3 footnotes with that to make it, but it sounds like a joke. And done at that pace, which Jack did, it was a huge laugh. It'd be fun to go through some of those old things. I didn't save any of mine, it kills me. See how many, I found a few, and there would be 2 out of 5 things on a page that you can't have any idea what it was about, what the reference was. The word celery would be obviously the key word in it, but you couldn't figure out why. Yeah, I pointed out that he had mannerisms and bits of business and sometimes whole character touches that you could point to the source of. It isn't as if his look at the camera, take, whether if this way or straight on, was Oliver Hardy. And he did some Fred Allen inflections time to time. And let's see, Karnak, I had a source for that, but time has passed over what that is. But it didn't matter, as I think I pointed out. The fact is he was funny doing them. They were familiar, he made them almost classic, and he made them his own. You can see him do Jack Benny all over the place, but that's fair, that's not stealing. And, he could just, oh, Don, and do Benny, or that sort of weak hand up to the face that Benny would do, and then let it fall. Yeah, he did, what do they call it when people steal something? A tribute, an homage to the person. Well, yeah, he did those, but he was funny doing them. They wouldn't have been as funny as your uncle that your family thinks is just as funny as Johnny Carson if he did them. So there's nothing wrong with that. I was really not eligible, I think, to be on Ed Sullivan at the time I was. But what you say, or even as you say, the strange thing was that I had made graham crackers and peanut butter snacks and lain on the couch, and I had lain on the couch, and Nebraska in the rumpus room or cellar, and watched the Ed Sullivan Show, never dreaming that someday I would be on it. I mean, inside the screen like that, coming out at me or whoever's watching. But my manager, Jack Rollins, managed to get me a shot on Sullivan just not too long before the show finally wrapped. So I had seen it for years, and now I was there. And I remember standing in the wings trying not to think, this is the show that means everything. As, say, going on The Tonight Show with Johnny did for a comic years later. And just go out and try to do it and remember it. And the dance number ahead of me. And they had that obsidian black glass floor for this dance number, which the stage had to rush out and grab. But it was dusty. And I thought, now, lying home in Lincoln, Nebraska, watching this, I wouldn't be able to see that. But now that I'm here in my dream, it's a little wanting. It's dusty, kind of dirty looking. While people are in awe over the profundity of that, I'll switch the subject now to something else. But I went out and it was everything to be a stand-up on the Sullivan Show. Alan King had done it 84 times or something, and I had my one. And Woody Allen was in the audience, placed there on the aisle as a plug for his play, as Sullivan would do. We're here as a youngster, and Woody took a bow. And Woody and I had just become friends, so I was up there performing for him. That helped. It helped a good bit. And then you always wondered, two of Ed's oddities were, one, stopping the comic from getting off. When you're finished, you want to get off while there's still applause. And Ed would hold him until the applause all but died or did die, and then you'd hear the guy clump off stage going, oh, Jesus. And I also wondered, what does Ed always say to the people? He always says something. Nobody warned me that he would be 6 feet to my right, standing, staring at the comic, in this case myself, right there. You just had to kind of pretend he wasn't, no more than 6 feet away. So I finished and I walked over and I thought, well, I'm finally going to hear what kind of thing he says to the comedians. And his words were, thank you, youngster. Nice to have you back. I thought, I'm not back. I'm not necessarily a youngster. But I knew as he said it that Ed's curious brain was trying to say, nice to have you on, we hope to have you back, and he telescoped it into nice to have you back. But I certainly liked him. We met again in a curious way, and another thing I didn't quite deserve to do yet, what's my line? I could name for you now the schedule of television that I watched from Nebraska on Sunday from Super Circus at 3 o'clock from Chicago, right on through everything, including Studio One. No, Studio One was not on Sunday. The Kraft Theater, one of those. There was Mr. Peepers with Wally Cox. There was Ed Sullivan. There was The Web. And there was You Asked For It and a couple more. And I watched every one of them every time. And they were all live. That was the best part. You knew it, too. Where could I possibly have been going with this by bringing that up?
What's my line? What's my line?
Oh, Ed, yeah. So there I went through the looking glass again. Rollins got me on What's My Line? I had sneaked into What's My Line and watched them tape, and I had watched them before that in Nebraska. And if a fairy had descended from on high and said, you're going to be on What's My Line, I would say, that's crazy. I was told I was, and by God, I sat there where I had seen Fred Allen sit for years till he died. And they never reassigned that seat to anyone permanently. They kept it rotating because honor Fred Allen. Anyway, it came to the blindfold bit for those of us old enough to remember What's My Line. And I put blindfold on, and I'm sitting there still saying to myself, are you really on What's My Line? And enormous applause for the mystery guest, challenger, mystery guest. And the panel had to try to guess who it was. And it was they began with me, which stunned me. And John Daly, the host then, said, Mr. Cavett, we'll start with you. And I thought, think of something funny right now. God, you've got to. And in a millisecond, you've got to. And I did. I said, I think the mystery guest is probably trying to figure out who I am. Well, this was like a bombshell of a laugh. It was, the world was perfect at that moment. Turned out it was Ed Sullivan. And I'm not sure if he did remember having seen me. Yeah, he did, because he sort of nodded to me in a way like I knew or said I knew. Because I've forgotten that until now. There was something to make me realize that, yes, Ed Sullivan knew me. So that was even more of looking glass time. I'm sitting here with the dread Dorothy Kilgallen and the beautiful Arlene Francis and the considerable Bennett Cerf. All figures from my pantheon of heroes as a boy in Nebraska. I never thought of Carson. I mean, I thought of him, but I never thought of me being different from him or anything like that. No, I just thought I'd do what interested me. It'd probably be the best thing to do. You'll be forced to have a whole lot of people you don't necessarily want because of the quantity that has to be filled. But so you get a certain number of bores. Somehow I survived the mistaken notion that I was an intellectual. Made me feel sorry for the country if they thought I was an intellectual. That sort of made me take pity on them. Buckley was an intellectual, and I had known some real intellectuals, but or that I used big words. I certainly never intended to give that impression, but I did. I mean, there's no use denying it. I was naive enough to think that you're supposed to read the guests' books. And I went through hundreds of pages of individual books and hundreds. And then got out there and made 3 remarks, and the guest talked, and maybe a 4th from me, and it was over. And I thought, God, I sat out on a beautiful day, sat in the house reading this 400-page book. So it isn't necessary to read a book to talk about it, of course, but if to talk about it in a certain way, obviously it is. But you tell us what it's about can lead to a good 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the guest and yourself. And I certainly never thought of striking off in another direction to appeal to a certain audience. But that's not to dismiss the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who wrote saying this is the show we always hoped there would be on television. And now that it's out on DVDs, people are saying the same thing, or it's throwing it to their children, who in many cases like it. But if you get a chance to see yourself 35 years ago, don't jump at it. I used to be a tall, red-headed man. It took me a long time to realize that you don't have to necessarily do the show by reading the first note that the booker has made and ask that question, if it's in question form, or you might bring up the subject. And then I did that so rigidly at first because I was so scared that I was going to clam up and have lockjaw and other things, that I didn't know any better. I didn't know what else to do. And a good friend pointed out, you know, sometimes it's not the best idea to have somebody sit there saying, we investigated this case, and or let's say we dug up the old brass-bound trunk and pried the lid off, and you'll never guess what was inside. And seeing yourself say, do you have any hobbies? It was almost that bad. And Jack, I remember a long time later, had said, kid, don't do interviews. That's David Frost, that's clipboards. You know, what's your favorite color? Make it a conversation. And you never thought Jack interviewed anybody, except it's become the term for the person who sits there. But, and I realized rather early, I think in fact with the show with the great, wonderful, distinguished James Mason, the actor, that I was so interested in what he and I and somebody else were saying that I forgot we were on, and it was being frantically signaled to go to commercial. And when that happened, you got comments on it from people who'd seen it. It registered strongly. People would say, that was so damn interesting, that's part about this. And it was never from interview questions. What's your next interview question?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry I put you in a band. At the very first, it's so scary because you realize I've been in plays, summer theater, done some Shakespeare and this and that, but don't have script when I go out there. Luckily, I had been a magician enough in high school days that I knew what it was like to go out in an audience and ad lib and get laughs, or fail to, but I guess it's the fact that there's the fact that you don't know what's going to be said next, either by yourself or the person you're talking to. And then the fact that in trying to concentrate so hard and being sure to look like you're listening, you forget to be actually listening, and then the guest's lips have stopped moving. And it's, oh God, what was he saying? I wasn't even here. Do you have any hobbies? Maybe would something like that would bail you out? Wouldn't bail you out, but it was better than nothing. Or admitting how awful it was. And it's, do my clothes look right? And they told me not to look too far to the left this time because they've changed one of the lights. And there's that sign that was just waved. I missed what it said. Oh God, did it say go to commercial or emergency or what? And what's the guest talking about? And about 5 more things are going on in your head. Where are we in the show? If I go a little longer with this guest, will it be all right? Because he's better than the bore we have coming out for the last one. And all that's in your head. It's like having I think I said it's a great job for people who haven't had a nervous breakdown but would like to see what it feels like. Just jammed with signals into the brain. It's flattering to be compared with Gleason in any way, but his fabulous talent for going out with a script, having looked at it once and learning it, that's just a freakish gift of some sort, a genius that he had. And then to not ever make one false move from the beginning of your acting career to the end in his acting work is just fabulous. And often they went up, as they say, and had to ad-lib their way out of speeches and things under the gun. It's exciting, and anything that can excite you, that most overworked word in our entire business, it should be expunged from it forever. It's just a very exciting movie, and we're the most exciting producer I've ever worked with, and the script is so exciting. And the person is sitting there with their lids at half-mast, not looking excited at all. I don't know why we can't come up with one other word. Well, fabulous replaced it for a time. But anything that that stimulates you makes the show more interesting, more fun to do. The sense of danger is exhilarating. And getting into trouble itself is exhilarating. Or taking the chance at just making trouble. Like saying, I wonder if now you could bring yourself to answer something resembling what I asked you, Mr. Roosevelt. Not the president, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry that Timothy Leary doesn't exist. Young folks, you will have to Google Timothy Leary. We don't have time to cater to your ignorance of anything that happened before your birth. But have you noticed that about young people? They don't know who anybody is. Fred Allen. I had the ultimate, finally. I said, that sounds like something Groucho Marx might say, and they said, I'm not sure I know who you mean. I wanted to kill him. I knew some people who lived ahead of me, and not just Napoleon. We were talking to Woody Allen about that. We knew Benchley and Thurber and Kaufman and had read them somehow. It's more unlikely that I would have in Nebraska, but my parents knew who those writers were, and so I had a break that way. But anyway, where was I before I said insulted the young and made them all turn us off?
Well, just sort of, maybe a favorite time you sort of laid into somebody.
Oh, well, that was, yeah. Oh, so Timothy Leary, I'll have to go back on my promise. The drug-addled Harvard professor whose motives in those days were to have everyone tune in, what was it, drop out. Tune in, turn on, and drop out, I think was his motto. Turn to drugs, the world is mad, so you, in a sense, paradoxically, get with it by being insane yourself or blowing your brains out with drugs. I'm sure he's responsible for a lot of deaths. Harvard finally canned him. But on this case, he said, he's plugging his new book. I was very new on the show. It was the daytime show. I had never said anything unpleasant to anybody, surely. And he said, this is the New Testament. This is the new Old Testament. The real Old Testament was a lot of old kooks on a bad trip. Now, I'm not religious particularly, but I felt very justified in saying, you know, I really think you're full of crap. Well, I don't think a lot of people saw it, but boy, those who did were so grateful. Like the mail that came in from housewives who were discovering the show in those days, since it was seldom promoted in any way, just loved it. Laughed, fell down laughing, they said, called friends, did you see it? Yeah. I remember that sort of feeling of power of can unleash a tremendous amount of laughter at someone's expense whom I don't like. Oh, sure, yeah, I'd been glad to have done it longer. At the time, I wasn't crushed, in that anything that takes that much out of you, ending has got a not positive side to it in a way. It didn't kill me that much. You appreciate those things afterwards and realize what you had that lasted, as it did, 10 times longer than I ever thought it would. Was a very good thing to have and hold on to if you could. I learned now, this is by an authority on the subject, at least twice the rating that Nielsen had registered. Only in recent weeks, as we sit here now in this part of this century, did they admit that they have been wrong in not measuring college viewers. I had A.C. Nielsen on a show once, and I confronted him with that, and he said, well, maybe that is something we should look into. But it was painful for me because I was hearing, you know, at the end of every day at school where I was Cavett. You get 11, it's time for Cavett. Everybody wants Cavett. So it's probable when there are, how many, 16,000 colleges or something, that it may have been a phenomenally higher rating. But it's hardly worth looking back at now. It's nice to know they were there. I got more letters than the ratings said we're watching. A letter's supposed to indicate 15,000 viewers or some crazy notion. I sometimes wondered it would have been a whole other experience if I had done the shows 10 years earlier or in less interesting times. Because you not only had the fun of your showbiz guests and the way the show would normally run, but the disruptions, sometimes literally in your audience, the riots going on, the White House occupied by the great unindicted co-conspirator who kept tabs on my show, which I still find a little upsetting, and it was at the time when I learned of it. Yeah, the Nixon White House apparently was paying very close attention. I haven't heard it, but in the tapes you can hear Haldeman say, this guy could sway an election. Not me, but they had been talking about people on the show, and he was talking about John Lennon. This guy could sway an election, which of course got Richard Nixon's attention. And when I went and testified that John shouldn't be exported from the United States, I didn't go so far as to say, but if it's between Nixon and John being deported, it would be an easy choice for me. And some of that got into a New Yorker piece, and then I guess I learned, and I have to recheck this, it's almost unbelievable, but I learned that when they wanted someone to come on the show to speak in favor of the SST controversy, which back then was a big thing, and I was informed that my producer was told I had 4 guests on who were opposed to the SST. That was the first chill down the spine, that somebody's watching and keeping score and powerful and able to do dirty things, and in fact quite comfortable doing dirty things, as we learned even more. So they put a guy on from the administration, and he was crew-cutted and named Magruder, but not the Magruder of Watergate. And he was all right, and he spoke for the SST, and I said, well, I certainly hope it is defeated, but anyway, thank you. And I guess they didn't like that. I should have just said, thank you. But the idea that you were being counted and thought controlled or thought observed, not in in a communist society or a totalitarian regime or something, but the good old USA. The Bush administration has brought back that feelings for those of us who are nostalgic for it, of course, and want even more crapping on the Constitution. I'm sorry, I've gotten myself carried away.
No, that's all good stuff. Well,
Oh, I learned that my staff was audited that year. My staff, many of whom didn't make vast fortunes, were audited as punishment. And we know that among the great unindicted co-conspirators' predilections was punishing people with the IRS, and I guess they did that to my staff.
That's funny. We heard the same thing from Tommy Smothers. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. I have to send for my FBI file. Anybody from then should, I guess. Oh, Arthur Godfrey had come on, speaking of talk. He was the king of talk for a long time when I was a kid. He had come on and said that the SST was needed about as much as we needed another bag of clinkers from the moon. And this upset the regime because they thought Arthur Godfrey would be for it, since he had flown everything there was except a jet helicopter at that point in his life. Amazing man. But he set the all-time record in his way for a certain kind of talk that was so popular that when his 3-hour, I think, simulcast was on, sort of like Imus is, in the morning, you could walk down a street in a Midwestern town that I lived in summer when the doors were open, no one had air conditioning, and you wouldn't miss a word of the Arthur Godfrey show, just as you went from one house's radio to the next. Staggering audience. He was, he was so relaxed and so friendly, and it just made you comfortable to listen to him. He had a wonderfully effective delivery and voice. A lot of enemies, too. I remember being surprised at Lucy once on a talk show that Arthur Godfrey had for a while. I think it might have been on Sunday afternoon. This meant that he had Arthur Godfrey and his friends, a 1-hour show in which he had all his regulars on, in prime time, the Talent Scouts show for 30 minutes, the simulcast show for hours and hours. Fred Allen said, because of Godfrey's aviation fascination and the fact that he dominated television, was almost on all the time, he said, when Arthur's not on the air, he's in it. And the perfect wording. He said to Lucy, who was one of his 3 guests sitting around in a chat arc, Lucy, we don't hear much about Daisy these days. And I first didn't know what he was saying, and then I realized. What about Daisy? What's Daisy doing? And Lucy, whom we knew from Lucy show as a nice lady, said, what's with the Daisy bit? And it was like she had her fists in her fur coat pocket, and she really just got nasty and let it show. And it was good in its way because it was a tribute to her work to keep that appearance out of the public eye. But you'd think, well, why shouldn't she? What do you think she went through to get to be what she was? Jesus, the amount of horrors. And the fact that she was a tough businesswoman and tough in that moment when Arthur mispronounced her late husband, not her late husband, but her erstwhile husband at that point. Or maybe they were even married then. Not sure. But everybody had learned to say Desi Arnaz, which isn't correct either, but it wasn't Daisy. But I liked seeing the hard-bitten showgirl that Lucy was for years come through in a moment like that. I liked her very much. She liked me excessively, I thought. We were like buddies, though we didn't spend all that time together. For that appearance, she made a tape of her ideas about what were interesting parts of her life, an audio tape, and sent it to me, and then talked to me on the phone for an hour about it. So she really thoroughly prepared herself. I don't know what the effect was, because I didn't really see it. Well, I always tried to get them into areas they hadn't talked about, because it was more interesting to me, and I thought it certainly might not be objectionable to the viewer either. I think there is that I have an instinct for it, that I don't understand how I do it, and that I'm constantly asked, how did you ever get yourself to ask about that when he's notoriously never spoken about it? I don't know. Some instinct in me that knows how the person feels, apparently, allows me maybe to phrase it in a way that I would want it to be phrased, that would allow me to talk about it. But I've seen myself do it, and I'm always impressed at it, and I don't know how it happens, and it doesn't always. I don't think we need to talk about that, is a occasional reaction. You know, I'm trying to think if I ever got that from anybody. I must have at times. I remember the feeling of, asking Betty Davis how she lost her virginity right after she said how comfortable she is with me and knows that I'm a gentleman. That was pure show business, you know, and you knew that you weren't going to crush the fragile little ego of Betty Davis with that question, especially, which she proved instantly by saying, "I'll tell you," as the laugh finally faded. But I often had guests say, "I don't know how you got me to talk about that. I can't believe that I said those things. I can't believe you got that out of me." I don't know what it is. I wish I knew what it is, because you could use it all the time. Just have to put it down to one of the mysteries of art, genius, talent, and nitwittery.
Well, I just want to step back.
That's Shakespeare, isn't it?
I'll say it is.
Yeah, it's Cymbeline. The Jack Paar staff stayed on. Most everybody, I think everybody who did stay on. There were about four writers then. And we stayed on for what I call the summer stock period of the show, where people, starting with the actor Robert Cummings, the first week, on through everybody and his dog who thought he could do a talk show, or she, got a chance to find out what it was like. Some were remarkably good. Some were just predictably awful. And it was fun for the TV critics, you know, to have somebody to knock or praise every week. I think, if memory fails to serve, I still think that one of the Gabors hosted for a week. I might have. I didn't hate them as much as everybody else did. I used to get praised for never having had one of the Gabors on my show. And I got to know Zsa Zsa a little later, and everybody liked Ava Gabor. Anyway, but I was Cavett. It was a feather in my cap that I had been anti-Gabor, which I really wasn't. But I got praised so much for it, I didn't want it to stop. So, anyhow, she did it. Bob Cummings did it. Jack E. Leonard did it. Donald O'Connor danced a week of The Tonight Show. It was really, really interesting. I think the only ones who did 2 weeks were of a rather large age span, Groucho Marx and the younger Merv Griffin. And Merv knew just what he was doing. I mean, he came out and he knew how to do it, and he did it, and he played it full energy and brightness and intelligence and all those things. And it was such a good appearance, those, if it was 2 weeks, it was certainly at least one, that people said, this is obviously the next guy to do the Tonight Show. And he came right in like he'd been there all his life. He knew how to do the music cues and this and that. And he just made a splendid impression. Very few people, I think, know or recall that Merv and Johnny started on the same day on NBC. As a result of that summer 2 weeks and all the clamor about who's this guy Carson, this guy Griffin is so good, I'm sure it made life unpleasant for Johnny for a time, for sure. And they both started on the same day, Merv in the middle of the day with me writing for him and with Dave Lloyd and Pat McCormick, and Johnny at night. And my impression at the time was that Merv got better reviews. Johnny was long beyond having to ever worry about the fact that the first week or so he was on, people said he's stiff or he's just, who wouldn't be? But Merv knew how not to be in his interesting way, and it shows that making the better first impression does not always carry into being the most successful at the time slot that you want and are clearly qualified to do. Johnny got good very fast, and it's unthinkable now to think of 30 years of anybody but Johnny Carson. But Merv sure was sharp. I think I hurt myself with Merv. Right, yeah, not when I was writing for him, but later when I was on his show. I had my first talk show success as a panelist on Merv's show. And he played everything so that you got maximum laughs and double. He just knew how to do it. And a columnist wrote a full page, practically column about me the next day, and I was now off onto being another level, a guest on shows, then the Tonight Show. But where was I going with that? Merv. Later when I was a guest on the show, I came in from makeup into the green room. The show had already just started, and there was this whoa sound from the audience. And I said, what happened? I couldn't see a monitor. And they said, Merv fell down when he made his entrance. So at least I knew that he had come walking out and slipped and fallen on his ass. And I came out and I said, I don't know what happened out here, but it registered on the Harvard seismograph. Somebody said he wasn't pleased with that. I can't believe it. He's got a hell of a sense of humor. Groucho did it 2 weeks, and that was the thrilling part. Because that was where, though I had met Groucho and become friends with him by then, that reminds me that somebody recently said that if there's only one thing in my life that I wish I could say, it would be I knew Groucho Marx. How I envy you, they say. Well, they're right, too. But by that time, I knew him, and but it was the first time I ever wrote a line and he said it. I don't know what the first one was, but just, to me, it's easy to write for Groucho in that I am so soaked with Groucho's delivery and from, see, I saw him backwards. My father's generation saw the movies, and then there was the quiz show, the game show, You Bet Your Life. I grew up on the game show, and then got around to the movies. So in my ear, I can tell you how Groucho will word anything you want to throw at me. My favorite moment, in a way, was he looked at a line I gave him, and he said, "It needs a sightening." I said, "I'm sorry? It what?" "It needs a sightening." As in, well, you certainly could have fooled me. Rather than, well, you could have fooled me. He could say, well, you could have fooled me and gotten the laugh. But once on one of my shows, he misquoted himself completely and got the same laugh that he would have gotten anyway, because you're so used to that. That voice means comedy as soon as you hear it, and people are ready to laugh. And he did a line not quite as strongly as he originally worded it. Wish I could think what it was for you. Maybe it'll pop into my head. Oh, I do know what it was. Yeah. I met him in the plaza for lunch one day, and he had just come down the elevator and with a priest who was in there. And the priest had said, as Groucho told me then, the priest said to me just now, you know, you're my mother's favorite comedian in the whole world. And I said, oh, really? I didn't know you fellows were allowed to have mothers. Well, the way he says it on the show that's in the DVDs is, I didn't know you fellows had mothers, which is funny enough if you haven't heard the other thing. And in Groucho's voice, it got just as big a laugh. But there was a dumb person, his name I probably shouldn't mention since I've categorized him as such, who did a television show once with Groucho. And attempting to do Groucho's, that funny sound I just made was, I was starting to say alluding, but I realized maybe I mean referring. Heard Groucho say at the anti-Semitic country club, he was told that his daughter could not. It was an anti-Semitic country club in Los Angeles, and he was told that he could not use the pool. And he said, but my daughter's only half Jewish. Could she go in up to her waist? Or up to her knees in another version, both of which work. But what the dumb person said was, can my daughter go wading? In what? You know, it just, people who associate themselves with humor should have some skill at it. He, on that, could use his full range of gifts and conversational abilities and improvisation, ad-lib, spontaneous, whatever you want to call it, of which he was of the highest order of anyone we have ever known, perhaps since Oscar Wilde. A comparison he would be amused by, I think. But, and he would know who Oscar Wilde was. Groucho was one of the best read people on the planet. He just, as a kid, he was always had 2 or 3 books around. His mother called him the Dunkle, I was told by a relative, the dark one. Probably didn't like him as much as the others. And I think he felt that. His daughter is alive and well and interesting. Her name is Miriam Marks Allen now. Allen is a favorite name in comedy, isn't it? Gracie Allen, Fred Allen, Steve Allen, Woody Allen, Allen and Rossi, Alan King. Anyhow, shut up, Dick. Here's something. Groucho never showed any signs of senility around in the time I knew him, though he aged a good deal and slowed some. As you can see by looking at my later shows with him. He was on, I don't know how many times, 6, 7, 8 times. Putting together a documentary once, you could see in the later ones, when you watched the clip from one of the first ones, that there was some slippage, but viewed by itself, it seemed fine. He never came on and was pathetic, and there was never a Blue Angel sort of experience with Groucho that I thought there was going to be the night at Carnegie Hall. But that's another story. But he said to me once, and then again about a year later, and then again about 4 years later, did I ever tell you the greatest compliment I ever had? And I said, no. I thought it was going to be from Franklin Roosevelt or somebody. He said, George S. Kaufman. George S. Kaufman, Boys and Girls, was Groucho's god, the playwright. Man, to take a dinner, you can't take it with you. Oh, many Broadway shows, brilliant wit. His wit took him off television once because of the witless. But he said the greatest compliment I ever had was from George. He said, Groucho, you know, you're the only man. And then he said, no, he said actor, correcting himself. You're the only actor I would ever allow to ad-lib in anything I wrote. Well, if you know the circumstances and know the people, that's a gargantuan compliment from a playwright who insisted that every syllable in comedy, that comedy came from the people who wrote comedy and was not improved by people who performed it necessarily. And the fact that he told me that multiple times, and he never told me anything else multiple times, he never had to say, I may have told you this once, you know, he seemed to remember. He liked hosting The Tonight Show, and I don't know if those things were kept, but there was a night where the great Victor Borge came on, a man largely forgotten by anybody under 60 now. Brilliant comedian, never failed, pianist. And he and Groucho had an exchange that was priceless. I don't know, I've often thought some archivist should try to find that. Not unlike the time when he came on with Bob Hope on a live show years before. And Hope's first line to him was, they'd kept him waiting quite a while. The first line in the sketch was, Groucho Marx, what are you doing here in the desert? And Groucho said, desert hell, I've been standing in a cold corridor for half an hour. And that was an ad lib, and so was everything else they said. But I've never been able to hear the rest of that or authenticate all of that. Talk show's a great idea. Does anybody get credit for inventing it? I don't know. If it would be, it would probably be, who was it who invented The Tonight Show and The Today Show?
Pat Weaver, across the hall.
Really?
Yeah, she's coming in next.
Oh, God. I did a terrible thing to him once. I was going through a period where I thought I should stop being polite all the time. I had met him in an elevator, and he'd learned that I was a writer on The Tonight Show. And we talked about the great Fred Allen, who was his great friend. And the next time I saw Pat Weaver, he had a copy of Much Ado About Me to give me. And I said, oh, I have that, thank you. But it is a wonderful book. And he, being the classiest man you could ever meet, he handled it perfectly. And I thought, what in the made me think that I needed to be honest at the cost of being so damn rude about this to this guy. I hurt now thinking about it. Change the subject. If you have any, at long last, if you have any decency. You know what that illusion is? That's the late Joseph Welch to the late Roy Cohn in the, I started to say in the Watergate hearings, in the Army McCarthy hearings, when he just destroyed the venomous snake Roy Cohn with, at long last, Senator, I think he said, sir, yeah. You should check me on this. Have you no decency? Oh, ruining this young man's life. That kind of thing. That's, that was an early form of talk television. And the first one I saw, we had just gotten the coaxial cable in Nebraska. So now we could get Milton Berle and all the things we heard about. And the first week of owning a television set in my life, one of the 2 or 3 great moments of it, the Army McCarthy hearings were on. And I thought, this television's a good thing. Something like this to watch every day. How does anybody ever turn it off? You watched it all day. So we had to put a fan on the set because we thought it was going to overheat and you didn't want to miss a moment of it. Well, let's see. So that's why I say, when you're smiling, the whole world smiles. Have I lost my mind? Not entirely.
No, we're
Once every few months, a cheap comic would come on a show called This Is Show Business. And cheap comics, often very good ones, but one of the standards was to come on singing When You're Smiling, and then say, here's some things to smile about. My wife had a pot roast the other day, and they do their act. And then when they get to the point where they're either bombing too much or have used their time and gotten a signal, they say, and that's why from a punchline, it has nothing to do with When You're Smiling. She's so bow-legged, when she sits around the house, she sits around the house. And that's why I say, when you're smiling. Woody told me about in the mountains once, they were auditioning some acts, and one act came on and sang When You're Smiling on and off. And the next guy, not having seen the other guy, did, and wondered why he got such an enormous laugh from the assembled writers out front auditioning.